There are days that don't announce themselves with thunder, but change everything in silence. That morning in Denver was one of them. She walked through the halls like she always did, sharp, composed, unshaken. No one warned her. No headline prepared the country. Just a folded document and a door that didn't open. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. But behind that stillness was something heavier than outrage, the weight of being erased in slow motion. They called it a procedural matter. But for 760 people who had chosen her, it felt like exile. And still, she smiled. The kind of smile that holds back a flood because the world doesn't know what to do with a woman who won't flinch. What happens when you're silenced? Not with chains, but with process. And what if you speak anyway? It was a clear autumn morning in Denver, September 19, 2025. The sun reflected off the glass panels of the temporary Federal Legislative Center downtown, an improvised Capitol, standing in while the dome in D.C. underwent seismic retrofitting. From the outside, everything looked ordinary. Inside, history was about to be altered without a single shot, without a single headline. At precisely 8:47 a.m., a sealed packet arrived by courier. No cameras, no press briefing. Just a thick manila envelope marked urgent. Judicial directive delivered into the hands of the sergeant at arms. Within minutes, whispers passed through the chamber, like a cold draft beneath the marble archways. No one said it out loud, but everyone turned their heads the same way toward the south hallway. That's where she was. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas's 18th District walked steadily down the corridor, prepared to take her seat in the joint subcommittee hearing on the new Federal Energy Stability Act, a sweeping bill that would allow energy conglomerates to bypass state-level environmental regulations. The room was filled with lobbyists, the stakes trillions. As she reached the checkpoint outside the chamber, she smiled politely at the Capitol officer. Her ID badge was already in her hand, but the officer didn't take it. He stepped slightly in front of her, eyes low, voice low. "I'm sorry, ma'am, you're not authorized to enter." At first, she thought it was a mistake, a miscommunication. She leaned in. "I'm on the hearing docket. District 18, Committee on Federal Regulation and Infrastructure." He didn't move. Instead, he extended a folded document from inside his coat. Directive signed by Chief Justice Roberts. Temporary suspension pending ethical review. You've been recused from participation in today's hearing and all congressional activities until further notice. There was a pause. Not the kind that fills a room, but the kind that hollows one out. A staffer walking behind her dropped a stack of printed testimony, pages scattered on the floor like leaves. Somewhere nearby, a camera clicked. Jasmine didn't say a word. She took the paper, nodded once, and turned. No protest, no raised voice. She walked out, heels silent, on the polished floor. Across the room, lobbyists in tailored suits watched from behind their coffee cups. One of them leaned over and whispered, "Well, that was quiet." But something else had entered the building that morning, something more powerful than confrontation, something quieter than outrage. It was the weight of being dismissed. And by noon, the news began to leak. Breaking: Supreme Court recuses Crockett from energy bill deliberations. Networks scrambled for details, but none were available. No interviews, no clear legal basis. Just a vague reference to ethical entanglements due to her past legal advocacy against monopolistic energy practices. Her past courtroom victories in Houston were being reframed as biased. On social media, it was immediate. Why Crockett? Our voice missing. Energy silence. In Houston's 3rd Ward, where voters had lined up in the rain to re-elect her, questions were being asked with tired voices. So who's speaking for us now? Inside a small union office on Alameda Road, James Kirklanda, retired refinery mechanic and longtime Crockett supporter, watched the footage of her walking out with his arms crossed. "She didn't look surprised," he muttered. "That's what scares me." That night, Jasmine Crockett sat in her townhouse on the east side of Houston. The TV played news on low volume. Her phone had 47 missed calls. Staffers, journalists, activists, allies. But she wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. Her teenage niece, visiting for the weekend, brought her tea and left quietly. On the table was the same folder the officer had handed her, now opened, marked with phrases like judicial conflict of interest and pending review of congressional eligibility. But none of the legal jargon hit her harder than one simple sentence at the bottom of the page. Effective immediately, Congresswoman Crockett shall be suspended from entering any federal legislative chamber or participating in federal votes until this matter is resolved. She stared at it for a long time, not because it was unexpected, but because it had finally happened. They didn't come for her with charges, or scandal, or evidence. They came with process. And in Washington, process is the most powerful silencer. And the next morning, the headlines were sterile. Judicial Review Sidelines. Controversial Lawmaker. Ethics concerns raised over Texas Representative's energy stance. Chief Justice intervenes in unprecedented move. No one used the word ban. No one said suppression. No one used the phrase Democratic representation denied. But the people in her district knew. They knew because they'd seen it before, just not on this scale, not this cleanly. When Jasmine ran her first campaign, she knocked on doors herself. No big donors. Just a clipboard, and the promise that their voices wouldn't get lost again. Now it wasn't just her voice that was silenced. It was theirs. And yet, she remained silent. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood one truth better than anyone else in that marble-lined city. You don't fight power with noise. You fight it by making silence louder. And somewhere, far away in Denver, Chief Justice John Roberts sat in his private chambers believing, for a brief moment, that he had neutralized a threat. But he hadn't seen the look in her eyes. Not defiance, not fury, just precision and patience. The kind of patience that doesn't scream, the kind that builds. For the next 2 weeks, Jasmine Crockett became a ghost in the halls she once commanded. Not officially gone, but functionally erased. She still had her badge, still had her title, but doors didn't open the same way anymore. Her name was quietly removed from committee assignments. Her congressional email bounced back, replies marked, pending judicial resolution. Her security clearance was suspended, not revoked, just frozen. Her seat on the Energy Subcommittee, taken by Representative Curtis Blaine, a second-term Republican from Nebraska who had received more in oil and gas contributions than any other member of the committee. But Crockett didn't raise hell. She didn't issue press statements. She didn't rally on the Capitol steps. Instead, she did something more disturbing to those in power. She smiled. Not the smile of concession, not the practiced press smile. The kind of smile that says, I see what you're doing. I'm not impressed, and I'm not done. Back in Houston, the world kept moving. The bayou swelled with late-season rain. Power bills surged during the September heatwave. In Pleasantville and Sunnyside, families juggled groceries and gas costs while listening to radio segments about federal energy deregulation, none of which mentioned Crockett's absence from the debate. At Mount Olive Baptist Church, Deacon Raymond Pope stood behind the pulpit during a community meeting and said what many had been whispering. They're hoping we get used to her being gone, hoping we shrug it off. But I didn't vote for shrugging. I voted for Jasmine. The crowd murmured agreement, not with rage, but with something slower, heavier, betrayal that settled in the bones. In D.C., the silence around Crockett was engineered, a subtle kind of erasure. In morning briefings, her name wasn't listed under pending floor motions. In political roundtables, hosts changed the topic when her situation came up too murky to discuss, too recent to resolve. Even allies treaded lightly. She'd walk the halls of her congressional office building and feel it the polite avoidance. Colleagues who used to nod now just glanced and kept walking. Elevator conversations ended when she stepped in. Her own staff, fiercely loyal, worked overtime trying to maintain constituent services without drawing more fire. The message was clear. Wait this out. Be grateful it's not worse. Don't make noise. But she didn't need anyone to tell her that. She'd spent years defending clients who were silenced with procedure black mothers in eviction court, small business owners denied by zoning loopholes, undocumented workers crushed by paperwork. The same patterns repeated, just in nicer buildings, with better lighting and more expensive pens. Every day, she returned to her office, flipped on the lamp, and answered letters herself. "Miss Crockett, is it true they kicked you out? I thought you were our rep. Who's speaking for us now? I voted for you. Don't let them shut you up." There were hundreds. Typed, handwritten, folded with care. One came with a child's crayon drawing of Crockett standing on a stage, holding a sign that said, "Let her talk." She pinned it to the wall behind her desk. Next to it, she placed a printed photo of her mother, Dolores Crockett, a nurse who worked 16-hour shifts in Oak Cliff and raised Jasmine and her 2 brothers on resilience, not regret. Her mother used to say, "Don't just be smart, baby. Be still when they want you loud. That's when they hear you the most." So Jasmine stayed still. But stillness wasn't surrender. It was preparation. The ethics subcommittee met without her. No press, no live stream. Their conclusion, pending further review of her past work with environmental nonprofits, Crockett would remain suspended from participating in legislation related to energy, infrastructure, or federal subsidies. A suspension with no timeline, no conviction, no charge. Just airtight process. Crockett read the announcement from her phone while sitting in the back of a cafe in the Fifth Ward. The espresso had gone cold in front of her. She didn't speak, just looked out the window. Across the street, a woman in scrubs was walking a little boy home from school. He pointed at the potholes in the road and laughed as he tried to jump them. That street had been on Crockett's district improvement list for 9 months' funding tied up in the very bill she was now barred from voting on. That night, she drove the same route. Saw 4 streetlights out, 2 water leaks unrepaired. She took notes. Not because it would change anything tomorrow, but because someone had to remember. She kept showing up. Town halls, food drives, union meetings. Her presence was steady, unshaken. One reporter followed her to a community water testing initiative in East Houston and asked, "Congresswoman, do you feel like this suspension delegitimizes your voice?" She looked straight into the lens. "No one gives me legitimacy. My people already did that at the ballot box." The clip made the evening news. It wasn't viral. It wasn't explosive. But it landed in the hearts of those who knew what it meant to show up anyway. Back in Washington, a conversation took place behind closed doors. Senator Roy Caldwell met with a lobbyist from the Tri-State Petroleum Coalition. They discussed rising pressure from public media and grassroots letters flooding committee offices. "She's not going to stir the pot," Caldwell insisted. "She's too disciplined for that." The lobbyist smirked. "That's what I'm afraid of." In her office one afternoon, Jasmine finally cracked. Not in anger, not in defeat. Just silence that gave way. She stared at a map of her district marked with red pins for every infrastructure project she'd helped approve, every school she'd fought to get air filters during the pandemic, every transit stop she'd personally visited. She closed her eyes, took one long breath, then reached for a blank notebook. The first page was empty. But she didn't write speeches or complaints. She drew a circle, and inside it, she wrote one phrase: "Bring Congress to them," then underlined it. Twice. She didn't sleep that night. But she smiled. Because the weight behind that smile had finally shifted from grief to purpose. They had tried to sideline her, but they'd made one fatal error. They'd forgotten she came from courtrooms, not cocktail fundraisers. From kitchen tables, not corporate dinners. From truth, not permission. And in that space of institutional silence, She was about to do the one thing power never expects: make the people louder than the law. It began, not with a microphone, but with a folding chair. On the first Saturday of October, just after sunrise, Jasmine Crockett stood inside the multi-purpose room of Dunbar Middle School in Houston's 3rd Ward. A rusted basketball hoop loomed over stacked chairs. The janitor had unlocked the building 2 hours early. Crockett had asked for no press, no podium, no optics, only space. She arranged 3 rows of chairs in a semicircle. At the front, a table with 2 clipboards, a jug of water, and a stack of plain language printouts titled, "What They're Voting On Without You." She called it the People's Session. No logos, no slogans, no speeches. Just one question. If you had a seat in Congress, how would you vote on this bill? By 8:30 a.m., 20 people had arrived. By 9:00, there were 62. They came quietly: a mail carrier, a retired math teacher, 2 high schoolers on their mom's lap, an HVAC tech still in his uniform. Some had never voted before. Others hadn't missed an election in 30 years. But none of them had ever sat in a circle with a congresswoman and been asked, "What do you think?" Jasmine passed out the pages. The Energy Stability Act was complicated: 92 pages of legal jargon, amendments, and economic projections. But Crockett had rewritten the core points on a single sheet. No partisan spin, no blame games. Just plain English. What would this bill do? Who would benefit? Who would be left behind? How would it impact Houston's low-income neighborhoods? She explained it like she was back in court, like the jury was the people. Because this time, it was. When the time came to vote, she handed out cards: yay, nay, and unsure. No one was rushed. No one was judged. Volunteers, mostly local, students collected the cards in a shoebox, tallied them on a whiteboard. Out of 62 participants, 55 voted nay, 4 voted yay, 3 were unsure. Someone asked, "What happens now?" Jasmine didn't flinch. "We publish the vote, and we do it again next week." By the 3rd session, held at a Vietnamese community center off Bel Air Boulevard, over 200 people attended. Local news covered it. Then national news picked it up. CNN ran a segment titled, "Barred from Congress. Crockett takes Congress to the people." But Jasmine never called it rebellion. She called it translation. The session spread from 3rd Ward to Acres Homes, then to Port Arthur and Beaumont. Volunteers printed maps with red dots for every people's session held. It looked like a grassroots wildfire. Teachers brought students, clergy brought congregations, union reps brought crews. And Jasmine never made it about herself. Every session began with the same phrase: "This isn't protest. This is practice." One night, after a session in Galveston, a woman approached her, elderly, cane in one hand, Bible in the other. She had voted in every election since 1972. "I've never understood a bill before," she said. Tears welled in her eyes. Not once, until tonight. Crockett took her hand. That night, back in her hotel, she sat at the edge of the bed, still in her blazer. She didn't cry. She just whispered to no one, "Then that's enough." Meanwhile, Washington noticed. But not in the way Crockett's critics expected. They laughed at first, called it a publicity stunt. Caldwell dismissed it as neighborhood noise. But the noise kept growing. Clips of Jasmine breaking down legislation in school gyms reached over 2 million views on TikTok. Reddit threads translated her sessions into Spanish and Vietnamese. High school civics teachers began assigning them as homework. And then came the report. A nonpartisan watchdog group released data showing 78% of Crockett's constituents opposed the Energy Stability Act, almost identical to the numbers from her people's sessions. That same day, Bloomberg revealed that Senator Roy Caldwell had received more than $1.9 million in campaign donations from energy lobbying groups since 2020. The timing was too clean, the narrative too tight. For the first time, the establishment flinched. Then came October 12th. The National Democratic Caucus invited Crockett to present her model during a closed strategy meeting. But Crockett declined. Instead, she offered a live stream. "No more closed rooms," she said. "If we're going to talk about representing the people, let's let them listen." They agreed reluctantly. That night at 7:00 p.m., Crockett addressed over 3 million viewers online. She didn't talk about herself. She read 3 letters from constituents. One from a single mother working night shifts who didn't understand why her electricity bill had gone up 40% while energy companies posted record profits. One from a 77-year-old retired pipeline inspector who'd voted Republican his whole life but wrote, "This bill sells out the little guy." And one from a 5th-grade civics class in Pasadena who sent a stack of questions written in colored pencil ending with, "Who decides what's fair?" She paused after reading that line, looked into the camera, and said, "That's the question every one of us in government should answer out loud, and on the record." The next morning, she received an official summons to appear before the Committee on Legislative Procedure, the very body that had allowed her suspension to stand. Crockett walked into the hearing room with no lawyer. She carried only a printed binder labeled Session Summaries, Volume 1, Volume 9. Inside were transcripts, vote counts, and handwritten feedback from over 400 participants across her district. The chair, Representative Elaine Masterson of Delaware, asked the first question. "Congresswoman Crockett, are you challenging the authority of the judicial branch?" Crockett leaned forward. "No, Chairwoman. I'm challenging the idea that people need translation to participate in democracy." Masterson raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting Congress doesn't explain itself?" Crockett opened the binder. Page after page. Real people, real words, real clarity. This is what they understand. This is how they vote. If that's a threat to someone's power, maybe that power isn't earned. The hearing ended in silence. But the effect wasn't silence. That night, on the floor of the Senate, an unexpected voice spoke. Senator Marco Hargrove, a moderate Republican from Ohio, delivered a brief statement. "I may not agree with Representative Crockett on policy, but what she's doing should scare no one unless your agenda depends on people not understanding it." In Houston, attendance doubled again. More volunteers, more live streams, more national attention. By mid-October, the term People's Session was trending across 48 states. And Jasmine, without ever raising her voice, had done what no press conference or lawsuit could do. She had shown the public what the system looked like without them in it. And once you've seen the curtain slip, you can't pretend it's closed anymore. They called it the National Oversight Symposium, a sterile name for what was, in truth, a political pressure valve. After weeks of headlines, televised people's sessions, and mounting public unrest, the House Committee on Legislative Transparency convened a televised hearing in Washington, D.C., inviting public-facing lawmakers to present alternative models of civic engagement. Jasmine Crockett was the last to speak. She arrived alone, no entourage, no binder this time, just a single sheet of paper, folded once and slipped into her blazer pocket. The hearing room was packed, every seat filled. Live streams ran on C-SPAN and YouTube. Behind her, 2 rows of her former constituents, teachers, veterans, and Nersesat stone-faced. Across from her sat Chairman Frederick Laskin, a 4th-term representative from Connecticut and longtime institutional loyalist. Next to him was Senator Roy Caldwell. Crockett greeted them with quiet respect, and then, when given the floor, she stood. No dramatic entrance, no fiery preamble, just presence. "My name," she began, "is Jasmine Crockett. I represent, formally or not, Texas's 18th Congressional District." Her voice didn't rise. It held steady, like the bass line of a song no one could ignore. "I've been asked to explain what I've done over the last month. I will. But first, I want to remind this chamber of something we often forget. The people who elected me, they know how to read." A low shuffle stirred the room. They may not read white papers or footnotes. They may not track roll calls or parse CBO estimates. But they read grocery receipts. They read utility bills. They read eviction notices taped to their doors. She paused, let it settle. And when the Energy Stability Act was introduced, a bill written in language so dense it needed a dictionary and a lobbyist to interpret, I decided to do something radical. She pulled the folded paper from her pocket, unfolded it slowly. I rewrote it in English. There was no applause. This wasn't that kind of moment. She laid the page on the table in front of her. This is the entire act, explained in under 700 words. It took me 3 nights and 2 dictionaries to translate it from legislative speak to something my grandmother could understand. She looked up. She passed in 2021, but she worked the night shift at Houston Methodist for 27 years, raised 4 kids on 1 salary. She didn't have time for committee markup summaries, but she always asked one question: who profits and who pays? Caldwell leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Crockett turned toward him. Senator Caldwell, you and I disagree on much, but I don't believe you're evil. I believe you've forgotten how long a dollar lasts in places like Beaumont or Galveston. I believe you've spent too many years in rooms where no one has to explain themselves in plain speech. Caldwell blinked, and Jasmine smiled, but it wasn't kindness. It was precision. She turned back to the room. You may believe that my people's sessions are a gimmick, that they're performative, but I'll tell you what I saw. She listed them slowly. A welder who read a bill for the first time in his life. A janitor who asked better questions than most lobbyists. A middle schooler who spotted a contradiction in Section 4C before the press did. She held up a hand, steady. If democracy isn't understandable, it isn't democracy. It's theater. Chairman Laskin cleared his throat. Congresswoman Crockett, some have argued your actions, while well-intentioned, constitute a circumvention of institutional process. Crockett's reply was immediate. Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, if the institution can silence a representative without vote, trial, or precedent, then what process am I circumventing? Laskin hesitated. She leaned in. I didn't step outside process. I revealed it. Then came the turning point. Crockett reached into her folder and pulled out a printed quote. A Supreme Court opinion, dated March 2018. She read it aloud. The judiciary must exercise restraint when intervening in matters that are the purview of elected officials. The legitimacy of our system depends on respecting the voices of the people. She looked up. That's Chief Justice John Roberts. His words, not mine. A hush fell. And yet, he issued a ruling barring me from serving my district not for breaking a law, but for breaking convention. She laid the quote flat on the table. Which begs the question, does democracy end when it becomes inconvenient to those who guard it? A rustle passed through the chamber. On the live stream, chat comments flooded in. She's cutting through them like butter. This isn't a speech, it's a cross-examination. Word as blade. She stepped away from the mic. I don't ask this body to agree with me. I ask it to remember that the people are watching. They may not understand every statute, but they understand silence. And they understand when someone is fighting for theme, even when they're locked out of the room. The hearing ended not with a gavel, but with stillness. Senator Caldwell left without a word. Chairman Laskin tapped his pen against the desk 3 times, eyes unfocused. And Jasmine Crockett? She walked out the same way she walked in. Alone, but this time, no one looked away. That night, the clip aired across every major network. MSNBC ran it raw, no edits, no narration. CNN brought in constitutional scholars. Even Fox News normally hostileered a 2-minute segment titled Congresswoman's Silent Strategy Shocks D.C. But the real shift happened online. A single 27-second clip of Jasmine reading Roberts' quote, followed by her question, does democracy end when it becomes inconvenient? Racked up 12 million views in 2 days. It became a meme. Then a bumper sticker. Then a classroom poster. In law schools across the country, professors dissected her testimony. One professor at Columbia tweeted, "What Crockett did wasn't political theater. It was jurisprudence in plain speech." And the court flinched. 3 days later, Roberts released a supplemental clarification through the court's press office. While the court stands by its intention to preserve constitutional integrity, we recognize the foundational role of elected representatives in serving the democratic process. No apology, no reversal, but everyone understood. He blinked. Back in Houston, the people's sessions doubled in frequency. By late October, every public library in the district had hosted at least one. Local businesses donated paper, chairs, even PA systems. And across America, other representatives began holding their own versions: people's town halls, backyard bills, legislation in plain English. A quiet insurgency was blooming, and no one could accuse it of being angry. It wasn't loud. It was exact. And through it all, Jasmine never once said she was wrong. She only asked a question, one that now echoed in classrooms, city halls, and quiet living rooms across the country. Who profits and who pays? And perhaps more haunting, who decides what we're allowed to understand? It was the morning of October 25th when the first bus arrived. Then another. Then a third. By 9:00 a.m., the National Mall was no longer grass and pathways. It was people. Tens of thousands. Teachers in matching shirts, veterans in fatigues, nurses with clipboards, construction crews in neon vests, families holding hands, clergy holding signs. None of them shouted. None of them marched. They just came carrying only one phrase, printed on white paper, handwritten on cardboard, painted on cloth banners: "Let us understand." It wasn't a protest in the traditional sense. No chanting, no megaphones, just a slow, deliberate walk toward the Capitol reflecting pool, where a single podium had been placed on a temporary stage. No celebrity guests, no opening acts. Just one speaker. And one name: Jasmine Crockett. At 10:12 a.m., she took the stage. No music, no announcement. Just the sound of wind and breath, and somewhere in the crowd, the subtle ripple of a flag being raised. She stood at the mic for a full 10 seconds before speaking. And when she did, it wasn't a speech. It was a roll call. She unfolded a scroll wide as her shoulders and twice as tall. Printed on it were 218 names. Every constituent from District 18 who had signed a petition affirming her right to serve, despite the court suspension. She began to read them, one by one. Not the whole list. That would have taken days. But enough. Enough to remind everyone watching on the live stream, on the news, from behind closed curtains, that she didn't stand alone. As volunteers took over the reading, rotating microphones to continue listing names, Crockett stepped back. In silence. Behind her, the Capitol stood still, its steps empty, its halls quiet, its lawmakers absent. Because power had never felt this much like absence before. At 11:23 a.m., the reading stopped. Jasmine returned to the mic. And in a voice even calmer than before, she asked, "How do you erase a voice that keeps speaking?" Then she held up one item. A single page of the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 2. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states. She didn't interpret it. She didn't raise her voice. She just read it, then looked out across the sea of faces. Back in the chambers of the Supreme Court, John Roberts watched the live stream in real time. No press release was drafted. No ruling issued. But somewhere between names 7,204 and 13,991, the air inside his office shifted. Because silence, when it comes from the people, is not quiet. It's crushing. By sunset, every major network called it the largest single-day civic demonstration in Washington since 2020. But it wasn't just the numbers. It was the tone, disciplined, resolute, unapologetic. For the first time in years, politics didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a return. The next morning, Jasmine Crockett walked into her Houston office. Her inbox had over 22 messages. Her voicemail was full. At 9:32 a.m., her chief of staff knocked gently and said, "You should see this." He handed her a copy of a press statement from the Supreme Court. In light of recent developments and upon further constitutional review, the temporary restriction placed on Representative Jasmine Crockett is hereby rescinded. The court affirms the importance of public trust in the democratic process and acknowledges that the will of constituents, when expressed peacefully and with clarity, must be respected. There was no apology, but it was enough. And she knew it wasn't about getting back in. It was about never leaving in the first place. That afternoon, she flew to D.C., walked up the Capitol steps. No cameras were allowed inside. But staffers described what happened. When her name was called on the floor roll, Crockett, District 18, present, she rose, looked out, and simply said, "I." The room, according to witnesses, stood still for 5 seconds. Then applause broke out. Not from one side of the aisle, from both. And when the speaker tried to resume order, he couldn't be heard over the standing ovation. It lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. But Jasmine didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She walked back to her seat, picked up the agenda packet, and began flipping pages. Because there was still work to do. And dignity, for her, had never been about revenge. It had always been about returning to serve. In the weeks that followed, the people's sessions didn't stop. In fact, they spread. By year's end, 114 congressional districts had launched similar forums in libraries, others in union halls, some entirely online. They called it the Crockett model, not because she invented democracy, but because she reminded the country how to live it. Law schools rewrote syllabi. Cable news ran specials titled "The Congresswoman Who Made Congress Listen." Documentaries followed. And yet, she kept declining interviews that focused on her alone. "This was never about me," she said. It was about a room full of people who were never supposed to understand what was being done in their name. 1 year later, the Energy Stability Act was brought back to the floor with revisions informed directly by constituent data collected through people's sessions. Crockett didn't sponsor it. She didn't block it either. She simply stood, read a 1-paragraph statement outlining 3 concerns, and then cast her vote. Nay, with reason. That became a phrase. Nay, with reason. It showed up on buttons, on murals, on protest signs in other countries where judicial overreach threatened elections. And John Roberts? He remained Chief Justice. But legal scholars noted a marked shift in his writing, more cautious, more restrained. His next public opinion on legislative matters began with an unusual sentence. The court must remember always that its authority is borrowed, never inherited. In Houston, a new public square was named Crockett Commons, the site of her first people's session. Its dedication plaque reads, "Here, the silenced spoke, and they were heard." Because sometimes the most powerful moments in democracy aren't the ones shouted from podiums or etched in stone. They're the ones whispered in school gyms, read under fluorescent lights, held in folding chairs, and echoed in rooms that thought they were safe from the sound. Have you ever felt it? That quiet moment when a room full of people looks past you like your voice, your truth, your very presence doesn't belong? Maybe it wasn't in a courtroom. Maybe it was in a meeting, a classroom, a family dinner, a vote you never got to cast, a decision made without you, yet made in your name. We don't always get to choose the rooms we're locked out of, but we do get to choose how we respond. And sometimes, the most radical response isn't shouting louder. It's standing still. It's telling the truth clearly. It's daring to be understood. Jasmine Crockett reminded us that dignity doesn't need permission, and representation doesn't always wear a title. What she did wasn't just brave, it was human. It was quiet strength, lived out loud. So ask yourself, what rooms have you been told you don't belong in? And what would it look like if you showed up anyway? If this story moved you, we'd love for you to subscribe, not just to hear more, but to join a growing space of listeners who believe in stories that heal, not divide. Share this episode with someone who needs a reminder that their voice still matters. And if you've ever felt silenced, we invite you to leave a comment. Your story deserves space too. Because, as Jasmine Crockett once said, how do you erase a voice that keeps speaking? We'll see you in the next story. Stay tuned.